Welcome back to the Art of Game Mastery's Finding Path stream, where we talk about all things Pathfinder 2e, and sometimes other things as well. I'm John. This is my co-host Jack,
How's it
and
going,
yeah,
Jack?
today we had a bit of a kerfuffle. We're kind of confused on which topics we are going to cover. I thought we were doing settlements. Jack thought we were doing what kind of GM we use. So sorry about that. We After talking, we decided to go ahead and do settlements, and we'll do what kind of GM are you next time. So yeah, let's I guess kick this off by talking about what settlements are. Also, apologies that allergies are driving me nuts, so I'm going to be itching my eye and whatnot through this whole thing. Um, but settlements in tabletop RPGs are they can be any kind of place where NPCs gather. They can be a village, a town, a city. Um, you could even design your settlements as if they were entire nations that were under one rule. Um, so one of a lot of times if you're running out of like an adventure module or something pre-written like that, these settlements will be designed for you. But if you're like us and like to do your own world building and everything, you'll find yourself having to create these yourself. Sometimes way in advance. Sometimes you create them in response to players' actions. And yeah, today we're going to talk a little bit about how each of us go about designing settlements, how the Game Mastery Guide talks about it, and how we can kind of use different facets of each of our ideas and kind of combine them into something really neat. So I'll let Jack start off with talking about how he goes about his settlement design. He has a bit of a unique perspective in that he does a lot of map design involved in his settlements. So yeah, it'll be kind of cool. How do you go about that, Jack?
Well, I like to start off with uh, unconventional methods. Usually, it starts off with a place that I want to draw first, and sometimes that place is the terrain. So, geography is a huge contributing factor to how I'm going to design a town or a settlement. Um, Besides, like, the first thing that I think of is what level do I want my settlement to be. After that, almost always the first thing that's going to come to mind is the geography. I love setting my towns in stark contrasting places. If it's going to be in the desert, I want it to be built on the bluffs of a cliff. If it's going to be off an island or archipelago, then I want it to be like a dockside or wharf, mostly in the water. Um, so I'm always looking for different geographical features that are going to give a reason for why a town is built. And that's kind of the reason why towns are built
That
in
is a
real
big
life.
one, yeah.
So,
As an example, like you mentioned, if you're in an island area, you're probably going to build on the coast. If generally speaking, you're going to want to build somewhere near water, just because historically that's where civilization has thrived. Because easy access to water is necessary in order for civilization to continue to live. Um, so that's a very good point, bringing up geographic location and that. And oftentimes when you're building settlements, you already know in advance where in the general world, like relatively speaking, these settlements are going to be. So start thinking about also what kind of natural, that's where I'm looking for, features, I guess, are also in that area, and why someone would have built a settlement there in the first place.
right. So, like with contrasting geographical features, terrain is something that I look at. So, the areas around it are going to have one type of terrain, and what's going to set the town apart is usually that it's going to have more beneficial terrain that is crucial to survival, and that could be less foliage or more foliage depending on the type of geographic that they're in. If they're in heavily wooded area, and then there's a spot of less dense forest, that might actually be beneficial for some like non-elf uh, people. And then if you're looking at kind of sparse foliage, and then you get to an area where it's like a really concentrated, dense forest, maybe really, really old woods, that's going to be good for making an elf town. And you should be just thinking about cardinal directions is usually what I think about, just like what's to the north of the area, what's to the east, southwest of the area, like just general idea of what's around these things. And these are going to help build upon some of the other factors that we work our way up on, especially if we're starting with something like terrain. Those factors could be imports or exports. Um, You were talking about how they get their water, how they get their food. It's gonna be another big thing.
Yep.
Is this gonna be a rural or suburban style city? It's gonna be a metropolitan with imports for food, or it's just gonna have nothing but cattle, grazing, farmland. And I think farmland is something that's crucial and gets left out in a lot of city planning.
Yeah.
Give your people their own food.
Yeah, I
Growing,
mean, when I'm building my settlements, I also take a more bottom up approach, and where I think about, okay, why are these people settled here? What do they need to survive if they were in this location? And yeah, farmlands are a big one. Thinking about what the imports and exports of goods they have, like, okay, these guys are or these people are on a coast, they're probably going to have a fishing industry going on. So they're probably
yeah,
going to the economy is probably going to revolve at least somewhat around trading the fish they catch in addition to eating it themselves. So what don't they have that they might trade that fish for? What is if they're on like a rocky coast or something, they might have access to fish, but they might not have great land, great soil for farming. So they might trade it for to the nearby elves in the woods or something in the forests for timber or for um, more plant-based dietary supplements.
I
So
mean, one of the first things that you kind of cued my mind into thinking about if I'm making a settlement and it's a fishing village, one of the hardest things to get access to is good hooks and lures,
mhm.
and they are not going to have access to metalworks if they're a coastal,
Unless they're
island.
like like in a rocky mountain coastal area, which wouldn't be the best place to settle at, I guess. But yeah,
If you get some dwarfs, you can trade some
yeah,
metalworks, and having fishing rods and other tackle and other um, the little metal hooks and nails and whatnot needed for fishing and boat crafting as well. All the stuff's going to be needed. So you just starting with that one fishing boat idea, and it's like, where do they get the lumber? Where do they
yeah.
get the nails? Um,
And that's a general thing with world building. Generally, you kind of start with an idea, and then it snowballs, and you just start. Okay, what happens here? What happened here? What happened there? Um, and you mentioned something else interesting. You mentioned some nearby dwarves or something in your example. Um, Something else I consider heavily when I'm designing my settlements is population diversity. So like,
Mhm.
what ancestries live in this city, and what's the rough ratio of that? Like, is it 30% human? 60% elves? What's the percentages of each of the different ancestors who live there, and what does that say about things like what the architecture might look like, or what the general culture would be like? Because when you start thinking of those things, you start to influence your design of quests. You start to influence things like what their government looks like, which thing you can really just start to snowball this very quickly as you start considering all these things. And I think if you take a look back at our real world history and society, you can get some ideas of how these things might play out.
Yeah, I think that the city that you're building should kind of take on a life of its own. That is the snowball effect. You should start slowly building these different connections. So we started with geographical terrain features. You work your way up into the trade routes. What's nearby? What's close by? What's really, really far? Like what's an amenity? Something that they don't get very often. Could
Mm-hmm.
be, spice is always been a huge part of trade by ship. So maybe spices, maybe they're
Horses,
exporting the
horses, another
horses.
big one. It's funny,
Wow, yeah,
I've been
hard to
playing
get
a
good
lot
trade.
of Civilization 6 lately. I like that. Chaos. Been playing a lot of Civilization 6 lately, and it's amazing how much or how many ideas you can get for settlements while playing that. How much you learn about what it takes for a settlement to thrive, and all those things are included in that game, like amenities and location of your city, geographical region, geographical terrain, features, all that stuff. So if you're not familiar with how settlements typically come about and thrive and fall and whatnot, I strongly suggest taking a look at that game or games like it and learning about this stuff in a fun way. So
I would say the same thing about Stellaris.
Yeah.
I know I'm on a Stellaris kick, but world building, yeah, doesn't get any.
Yeah, the 4X games are really an easy way to learn that kind of stuff in a fun way. Um, so I talked a little bit about government and whatnot. Um, what kind of is it? Obviously, most of your settlements are going to exist for some mode of play, right? Whether that's exploration, whether that's downtime, whether it's combat, or all of the above, or any combination of those. Um, so fleshing out these ideas of how your city works internally can help you design quests that make sense for the intended mode of play. For instance, if it's just a place where they're doing downtime, well, maybe you don't need to go super deep into it until they actually have a reason to come here for some other mode of play. But you probably do want to at least figure out who your prominent store owners are, what they sell, what they're able to buy from the people, what they can convince, what your players can convince the NPCs to craft, things like that. Um, and that's where the game mastery guide kind of comes up with this idea of a settlement level, uh, where basically the idea is that each settlement you're in has a level associated with it, just like any other character would. Um, but that level is used to determine what a general player character can access reasonably within that settlement. Like if uh, if the settlement level is higher than the item level of something they're seeking, well, they'll probably be able to find it pretty easily as long as it's common or uncommon sometimes. Um, if the item you're seeking is way above the settlement level, you're probably not going to find it. But then if your character is way above the settlement level, then maybe they can use their pool and reputation to kind of convince a store owner to seek out somewhere else the item they need. And it might
Mm,
take time to import it. It's not going to be something you just do like that. But or maybe you convince the local blacksmith to attempt to craft something they're probably not super confident in, but maybe they can pull it off, kind of deal. So there's things like that you could do, but they never really talk about how to determine the level of a settlement. And that's where I
it's only
think
like four
personally,
pages.
what were you gonna say?
It's only like 4 pages long in the
Yeah.
DMG
Well, I
for
mean, they
the
got a lot of stuff to cover in there, so. Um, but
yeah.
personally, I like that idea of the level. I think that's a really cool way to say 4 days worth and half the gold with craft check. Um,
Pretty standard.
yeah,
I
I mean
still
that's
would
how if
like
you were crafting yourself, right? But I think the idea of a settlement level was more inclined to like what the players have access to outside their own means. Um,
well, so what I'd use for a level when I'm designing a new city, say like Tagasia campaign, when I made Wireglen, which was the starting hub, I made that a level 1 town, and I made it abundantly clear that level 2 and level 3 items would go under like the rare unique
yeah,
categories. Like it would be much harder for a town to get those items, and then even just base stock items they're going to have a limited stock and supply of. And so like when you guys went to a different town and I set that level, I also set like parameters for the level for the town. So like the town and its full potential could go up like 2 levels worth
right,
based on the party and how well they invest in that town. That's some deeper thoughts to that, but you shouldn't have everything available in a town, and
right,
that can also be a driving force. You as the GM, if you're wanting the players to get on with the plot, uh, or if you want them to go truly gone fishing, you can use availability of items to help facilitate movement between the two towns, get the players going on adventures.
right. You could maybe some NPC or maybe even the player characters themselves need a particular item, but it's not available where they're at for a quest or for something. You can kind of seed them with the knowledge somehow that this item might be available somewhere else, and that could kind of nudge them in the direction they should be going, kind of deal.
And that's good for increasing downplay. So that way, when they have downtime, you can tell them, "Hey, you were looking, investigating, in this. Are you going to use your downtime to research this item or find a way to get this item shipped to you?"
Right. And I mean,
Or
speaking of quests, when you're in a town, that's if they're playing the exploration mode in a town, they're generally looking for some kind of quest or something to do to get them out of town, right? To go to a dungeon, to the next town, something. They're trying to go somewhere for action, right? And that action could be in the town itself. You can. It's perfectly reasonable to run combat or chase encounters within the same town. Um, but an easy way to come up with those quests is to determine what the government is like, what other organizations and factions are around the area that would might be competing for power within that city. Like typically
Right.
governments and even real world governments don't have full control of an area. There's all usually some kind of other there's usually
But
some
they'd
kind
like
of
you to think.
other factions about trying to take control. So you can kind of use that to make
You
interesting
have a very
plot.
valuable point.
What was that?
You bring up a very valuable point about the perception. Like you might want to, when designing a faction, what is the common folks' perception of who's in
Right.
charge, a monarchy or a particular guild? Um, because, like you said, when you said it right off the bat, you said no particular faction is in charge of the, no government is in
Yeah.
charge of everything. They like to think that they are though, so that's like something also to kind of think about when you're writing it. Like highlight, underline. Hey, this faction is kind of the face of the city. It's out in the open, whereas these factions might be a little more hidden or behind closed doors, or these factions, just aren't well known.
Yeah. A while back, I was watching a YouTube video by a guy named Eric Vulgaris. He does tabletop RPGs, YouTubes. I'll link to his YouTube channel down in the comments when it's posted. But he was designing a sandbox game specifically, and he was talking about his approach to coming up with the settlements that the players would have access to initially. And he had an interesting idea where he had this spreadsheet of where he's keeping track of everything, and for each settlement he knew he needed like 6 settlements off the bat based on how far he wanted the people to travel and whatnot. Um,
Mm.
so he had this idea of for each one of those settlements, he would come up with the origin, the activity that it was going through at the time, an obstacle that it was going through that was impeding that activity, the a nearby resource that it had access to and control of, and a resource obstacle, some obstacle that was keeping them from accessing that resource. And I thought that was a really really cool approach to it because it kind of gets you thinking about um, what is the going ons in this city and not just what does the city do, right? And
Mm.
I started to incorporate that a bit and when I was designing settlements in the shifting sands, and I actually really like this approach, and I might continue to use it. Um,
That's a
and
cool approach.
he to make his life easier, he came up with for each of those things, he came up with like a roll table for each of them so that he could quickly, you know, come up with unique cities without having to like sit there and think of each one individually, kind of deal, which I thought was a neat approach. Um,
There is a lot of governments to cover. Some things that people don't think about: fantasy settings. A theocracy is more likely going to happen, in my opinion, and
mm-hmm.
it's not expressed enough in fantasy. Theocracy is just basically one deity is worshipped in the settlement, and they are kind of the governing factor.
Yeah.
And I feel like when gods are real in a society, that actually have avatars that come down and clerics who get powers from them, that would probably be that would crop up way more than we see in modules.
Yes, I
I feel
agree.
like. So
Um,
don't try for making a theocracy.
there's
Keep
obligarchy or however it's pronounced, where it's very militaristic. Trying to expand their borders.
authoritarian.
Um, there's I can never pronounce it, but it's like genocracy. Is that how it's pronounced? Where it's like ruled by an elder.
Yeah, I don't not
Yeah,
familiar with that one.
it's like
What was
generocracy or
it?
something like that. But basically,
Oh,
it's typically in smaller
bureaucracy.
villages, but it's ruled by like there's the elder is the leader basically of the village, and it can be the elder can be chosen generationally or just by appointment. It doesn't there's different ways of doing it.
I think you're pronouncing it correctly because geriatrics is used to describe like handling old people. So I think that's where the root of that word comes from.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of really cool government approaches, and a lot of them overlap a lot. There's some that are like, have uh, features of one and then features of another, and they're kind of their own thing. So, you can do your research there and get some really cool effects there. And that'll also, whatever governing type you select will probably determine what kind of laws are in that settlement. And laws are
Mm-hmm.
something I feel like a lot of people, myself included, I actually kind of overlook them sometimes as well. But you know, different settlement, different cities, different nations, they all have different laws based on who's in charge and whatnot. So think about that. Like maybe it might be, generally it's going to be illegal to kill someone within city borders, right? That's
Within
probably a given. But
city,
maybe the import of certain spices is outlawed because maybe they're trying to, you know,
an embargo with
get an
another.
embargo of them, or maybe they're trying to produce their own alternative and trying to push that within the city, so they want to outlaw certain ones. Um, and that can be an awesome way to spawn quests and whatnot as well. Um,
Conflict, make their
yep.
city seem more lively.
So yeah,
I know
definitely
my
think about
people.
what unique laws are within the city as well. What's their code of conduct, so to speak, and how are they enforced? Is there a town guard that's on
Oh,
payroll? Is it just a collection of volunteers? Maybe it's a small enough village to where everyone just kind of enforces themselves, and it's a honor system kind of deal. That's definitely something that happened in the past. So those kind of things are all kinds of things you can think of. Let's see what
so
else.
like one of the last ones I would cover would be fiefdoms. Those are my favorite for implementing mixed race cities.
Mm-hmm.
Like whereas the city was kind of built not with one particular race in mind, but more of like a conglomerate. I have a city called Starport in one of my other campaigns that my players is about to go visit, and it's ruled by like a goblin fiefdom, but they're just the ruling class. So there's like every race is kind of represented in this area, and the stuff that's going to be built upon it is how they're all interacting with each other. So one
You
of
want,
the
do you
easier
want to
ones
talk a
to
little
do
bit
is
about what a
fiefdom.
fiefdom is, just generally?
I'm not an expert on fiefdoms, but a fiefdom would be when you have different chiefs who are in charge of different sections, and it can be either territorial sections or governmental sections. So you might have some people in charge of, if it's governmental, it would be like who's in charge of the military, who's in
Mm-hmm.
charge of logistics, who's in charge of supply, kind of like how a military functions. Or it can be territorial, where you have like maybe a chain of islands
Right.
or sectors of a city, maybe like districts, and that would be more like territorial. So each particular fiefdom is controlled by those different things,
Yeah, it was very popular in ancient civilizations, especially.
and it just helps build up the thought process of vassals, people who are um, giving information to different parts of the fiefdom, and then
Right.
you have more room for espionage because you've got advisors and you've got people who are trying to get information from these different fiefdoms. And if you're looking for doing political strife or any kind of political intrigue, those are some of the easiest ones to use. Like a real base example would be like the Fey courts, like what's going on between the different seasons. Especially if you're dealing with Fey creatures, politics can get interesting really quickly if that's like what your players are looking for. Or you can just tone it down and give them more combat.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, what?
you were saying about guards, which something we should probably think about is like what's like a minimum level for what constitutes a settlement to actually have its own guard. Like maybe like the starting levels of like 2 or 3 where they have like a militia, like Minutemen,
Right.
people who would actually respond to something before you get up to this. Because when I think about the city level, that's usually one of the contributing factors I think about for what the guard force is going to be. I usually do like the captain of the guard is going to be one level higher than the city, and then one level lower is going to be what all of the town guards are going to be. So
Yeah, I mean, for me, that's definitely something that goes into determining the level of a city. For me, though, it's kind of all the stuff we just talked about. The population size, which we didn't really talk about, the population density, the population diversity, the import of export of goods, how how quote unquote rich they are in resources. Um, what their government structure is like, what everything like, all these things are kind of go into determining the level. So you might have something. Yeah, I mean, your enforcement very much could be peasants taking up farming tools, in a lower level city. But I guess I could say that if you have something that's really high, one of these things like maybe it has a really diverse population, right? It's very urbanized, I guess you could say. Um, and then, but maybe the maybe they're not super rich, so that might still be a lower level city, right? Maybe the whole thing is the giant slums, but there's a lot of people in it. Maybe they're kept in check by a oppressive government or something. Um, it probably wouldn't be a super high level city, though it probably would have high guard levels because they're probably well trained and to keep their citizens in check, kind of deal. So there's all
Mm-hmm.
kinds of like trade offs there you got to make, and there's no really exact science to it. I would say, but those are the kind of things I would think of when determining the city level. What
After
thoughts
going
there
from
are?
the city level for the guards, if I'm doing a theocracy, that's going to be one of the ones that hits hardest.
Hmm.
I like to make my upper echelon of the military. 'Cause I'm veteran, so military echelons, like, I don't know, really like designing them. The captain of the guard is probably going to be of that type of faith. The My group was in a city in Libra, and the city was devoted to Aristil. So the captain of the guard was a champion of Aristil, and a much higher level than the party at the time. I think the party is the same level now. And then so all the guards were lower level paladins, champions, so to speak, and it kind of helped make me think like pre-think out what the laws were going to be because it was so religious and so law centered. And that's another one of those snowballing effects.
Right.
But it went very different from like a nearby town, Merriweather, which they hired goblins to be their local enforcers. So there's like a bunch of goblin knights roaming around patrolling because they were like what was that, Game of Thrones Unsullied, kind of like buy an army,
Right.
for protection because they already didn't have any natural protection. So another thing to do is have
I was
mercenaries.
about to say mercenaries are definitely a thing that was commonly used in the past, even, and probably
So
underutilized, I'd say, in fantasy tabletop RPGs. I feel like they should be used a lot more often than they are.
they should be given to the players as an option for downtime to serve on the local guard, doing watches, um, especially if they're trying to make a quick buck. Guard duty, easy money. Um,
Yeah, I mean, it
and
kind of
build
falls into the idea. I mean, the opposite kind of falls into the idea of hirelings too, right? Like, it's totally reasonable to hire a skilled, mercenary to assist you in something. And I think that it's a concept that players don't often take advantage of. I find the concept of hirelings ignored more often not in general in games I'm in. I don't
players
feel
don't want
like.
to have. You don't even like to control extra people when you're playing a game.
Yeah, exactly. Um,
I love it. I think other players who like it kind of vibe with it. I like it
yeah,
when they have a follower or a companion.
but there's a difference between a hireling and a companion, right? Like a hireling is someone who is restricted in what they can do, but you pay them to do a specific role, and I feel like that's
They might
often
level up.
underrepresented in games. Even though was that?
They might level up. You have a torchbearer who keeps going into dungeons and pulling your
Yeah,
butt out every time something goes sideways.
yeah,
They might get a little experience. They might get a level, and they might start building up their own personality.
yep,
There's nothing wrong with an NPC coming to life.
for sure. I'm just saying I don't see it used very often in games, and I like to see it used more. But
Yeah.
what kind of hirelings you can find is also something else you might consider when building a settlement. I mean, you're probably always going to be able to find someone unskilled to hold torches and whatnot, but maybe the local thieves guild is pretty strong in the area, and you can find someone to do a bit of more dirty work for you.
those
things
are
like that.
those are definitely things to consider. We were talking about availability of goods. We're talking about level. One of the things I do next to the level is I have a little like wand I use for a magic symbol, and I use a little sword for like blacksmithing.
Hmm.
And then I have like other little quick shorthand symbols when I'm designing my towns. Like trying to think of like what does that level entail? And if it's a very magic enriched society, they might not have any blacksmiths, but that's a side point. Um, it means that scrolls, spells of those higher levels can be accessed.
Right.
That's another thing that players are always asking is like, hey, I need a remove curse. Where do I go to find that? And if they're in a low level town, it's gonna be like, you need to go to a bigger town. You're not gonna find that in a level 4 town. To be able to cast 4th level spells or higher, you're looking at a level 8 town or something higher. So maybe it's time to get out of the back roads and go to a more metropolitan place and find something like that.
I was responding to Elias while you
Yeah.
were saying it, but well, not familiar. I mean, I know who Machiavelli is, and I know what the player's guide is, but I'm not familiar with Machiavelli's player's guide.
I'm not familiar with Machiavelli's player guide either, but I do know Machiavellian is used to describe somebody who is selfish or evil.
Well, yeah, I mean,
So that's
Machiavelli was also a person, right? He was a playwright, so
they labeled the dark triad after one of their personality traits:
yeah.
narcissism, Machiavellianism, and sociopathy.
Yep.
It's just an interesting name. It really sticks out. We'll
it's a good name.
We'll talk about that in the future. Feel free to improve upon that because there's a player's guide and I haven't read it. I want to know about it. I love player's guides.
So, a lot of the stuff we've been talking about so far has been kind of a bottom up approach to designing settlements. There's also, one way you could do it also is a top down approach where you think, okay, well, what do I need right now, and how do I get there? So maybe your players are X level and you need a settlement for a specific reason in your campaign that that rivals players for in their level as well. So you might consider thinking of what kind of governments might be available in a level or a city of this level, right? You might think what kind of resources and magic items and stuff do they need, and what that might influence the level of the city as well. So there's all kinds of there's kind of well, all kinds of, there's two different ways you could approach this, and I think I think both are useful. It's going to really come down to preference and situation. I've definitely done top down cities before. I typically prefer bottom up. I think it allows for a more organic and immersive and realistic seeming city. Because when I find personally when I do take the top down approach, I tend to cut corners at times and do things that might not make the most sense but are kind of necessary for what I need. So that said, players, I don't think there's ever been a point where players actually necessarily cared that didn't really make sense, but maybe you as a GM do. Consistency is valuable to some of us. But yeah, I mean, you could take either approach. I think trying both to see which one you like more, personally, is something you should consider. Because everyone's different. Everyone like we may be advocating for bottom up, but there's tons of GMs out there who are really good who also advocate for top down. So try them both, see what you like. But either way, something that I think that a lot of GMs don't consider, mostly because it's a lot of work, is the concept of settlements changing over time and evolving or devolving over time. Maybe this is a level 6 city right now that's going through some inner turmoil, and depending on the player's actions and how they resolve that conflict, if at all, it could devolve the city to a lower level because maybe there was a huge catastrophe and a lot of citizens died, or maybe they completely lost access to resources or something.
Or that high level wizard left the town and
Exactly.
the high level wizard left the town and the whole market, destabilized.
Or maybe the players resolve it in a really good way that's beneficial to the city as a whole, and maybe it just that level goes up. Maybe a lot of trade routes are opened up. Maybe a lot of immigrants are coming in because they see peaceful times ahead.
coins that the players keep dumping off on the shops.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing is,
They turn profit, and then the whole society gets richer,
right. And
attracting
like
more
maybe in,
adventure.
because of the player's actions, you get this really wealthy merchant that comes in and he has the money to buy those magic items the players have been sitting on and not going to find anyone to buy. And all of a sudden you boost the economy even more from that. So there's all kinds of things to consider there. Exactly, the Renaissance era is the perfect example of this. Um, the Prince. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, it's one of Machiavelli's finest piece. Um, so yeah, I mean, how do you kind of approach the idea of change when you're making cities, Jack?
I have so many different methods to
I
pull
mean,
from
besides
for.
just destroying them outright. Okay.
Okay, well, that one is a given. Like, it's, and I don't even destroy the towns. I swear it's the party who destroys the towns as they leave. There's just something about burning a bridge and then fleeing for your life that the players just, I don't know, I think they really enjoy doing that. So I had a populous style game where my players, we started off with a big group. We got a little slim for a little bit there, and then we started picking up new players again who were more interested. So I was in a 2-year long campaign with a dedicated group and had my 2 ride or die people with me. And the game grew over time. The cities grew over time because the players were spending years in town and they didn't want to leave town. They went to the governor and bought his position. And the governor was worried about losing their, their their job, their lifestyle, and then they got hired on to fill said position. And I was like, okay, so they basically made the governor just a figurehead, so he could continue governing, but
He's a puppet,
the
yeah.
party wanted to make all the decisions. And they made good decisions. They built a wall around the city that they were in, and then they built guard towers. They started pooling their resources, making trade relations with the nearby city for more metals. Um, I had to change the way that game was played dramatically because I went from designing dungeons and monsters to now I need to design scouting missions for their soldiers. I need to design diplomatic relations. Um, so they started writing letters to different cities, and I had to think about like, okay, what governments are going on over here? Who's cool with this? Who's not cool with this? Some of the major cities were like, this is an upstart town. It's getting out of control, and they didn't want to trade or deal with them. And eventually, destroying a town is always is always an option, John. I tried. I actually brought in a guest GM into a Christmas game once, and for a Yule party, and I gave them a bunch of resources to basically, because they weren't coming to the table, kind of scout out what was going on. So they figured out a way to infiltrate the town, and then they attacked it head on with ships. They used a lot of different tactics to lure out their navy. They built a navy, and it was an okay navy. It was a starting navy. So you building a town can greatly change what's going on in the dynamic of your game. You can go from Dungeons and Dragons to city world building, and if that's what the players want, then I mean, give it to them.
Yeah, I mean, commonly players will also might want to build their own town as well, right? Maybe they're super high
They
level
were
and they
doing
want to start new characters. They might retire their current ones, and maybe they use the reputation influence to build their own town that you could also kind of grow over time. And I think there's not a lot of rules for that in Pathfinder 2e like out there. And I think that'd be a good supplement, third party supplement someone could create. Like,
I should do that because I spent a lot of time researching, like, well, this was 3.5 era, so I need to find relevant Pathfinder stuff. But I spent a lot of time researching like what kind of resources it would take to build a stronghold.
yeah,
There's some old resources we could look at. I think they're called strongholds in general, and that's for rewarding players with all that extra money. Like,
right.
do they want to build their own castle?
Yeah, I think for Pathfinder 1e, they had that Kingmaker module that was like a sandbox module that they're redoing for Pathfinder 2e that has some rules around strongholds. But yeah, strongholds are a good start. I think that it'd be cool to have rules around to go beyond that, though, where like, okay, now you have a stronghold. Now you have all these people coming in who are, just living there. Like, how is that going to expand? how's that
I
gonna
used to do
scale?
some like roles to describe like when the party was writing to different cities, they were encouraging um, not refugees, but what do you call just like people who are just looking for work, who just like come into the city. So just like basic travelers and
Mm,
whatnot. I was rolling like bi-weekly or monthly for them to determine how many new people were coming into the town or like what the population growth was, and they kind of had to solve this residential commercial like planning for because like if you get a bunch of mouths to feed and nobody's working, you can the crime rate will go up in your town. Before you know it, you're gonna have a thieves guild that you didn't know about. A second thieves guild, uh, barmaids and barristers.
what was that? Oh, the chat. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a good point. I mean, organizations they might be there to begin with, right? But they might also come
Mhm.
about over time. Maybe your city does become or town does become really wealthy. That'd be prime up. That'd be prime place for a thieves guild to pop up. There's a lot of jobs to be had there. Um,
I like the idea of a rival thieves guild, like the underdog,
hmm
the upstart. That's got so many quests right there. You could be looking at months of playtime in a city that you designed, and it would be all role play at that point.
Definitely. Let's see. We had about 17 minutes left. What about chat? Does chat have any ideas for what kind of things they'd like to see? They like to see in cities and when their GM ads in there.
Well, I mean, I've got a list of other things I can come up with while
Go
we
for
wait
it.
for chat.
Go for it.
So one of the other exploits is looking at all the different crafting stuff,
hmm
having um, basically like a professional in a particular field. So I like to throw in one random occupation that this town is really proficient at, and it might be something as wild as putting up an observatory. If you're building a city and it's up in the mountains,
hmm
observatories make sense. And I think that astronomers don't get enough credit because you think about like Roman astronomers, they were doing this with you know medieval equipment
Right.
or before that. So if they can do it, then your fantasy world can have that in there. And studying the planes should be encouraged. The people who are living on this planet, they know how many suns, how many moons are orbiting around where they're living because you're at that fantasy level. Maybe you're playing a more prehistoric game and they don't understand those things. You're building a settlement for that. Power to you. Um, so I like to add in some kind of technological good that they really excel at. If it's a river city, I almost always default to putting a mill next to the river, and then I like to put in a tannery. Tanneries is something that kind of gets overlooked, but leatherworking was a huge deal in building up. I mean, every suit of armor is made with leather,
hmm
even all of the metal ones. They got leather
Yep.
underneath, and so tannery is a big deal. And then you can build conflict between the mill and the tannery. Did the tannery build upstream or did they build downstream? Um, is there an old mill? I always throw in at least one abandoned building or one like neutral, uh, un, um, like its identity not revealed, like right off the bat. There's always that empty house that's for sale or vacant, and then there's always like some kind of burnt down or old looking
Right.
structure that's not being used, and that's really good for hideouts if you're trying to hide a assassin's guild or maybe the city was controlled by a vampire. Oh, that's another government we didn't mention being controlled by an evil source.
The demon
That's
lord.
there's a lot of profitable towns who are run by a lich. A
hmm
lich needs a the last place you're gonna look for a phylactery is in a really nice peaceful rural town where
Yeah.
I'm just
Good
saying
point.
if a lich is like, nah, I'm gonna build an old tower in the middle of nowhere Farmingville, and that's gonna be a great place to hide my phylactery. What do we got
So
in
I'm just
the
catching up in chat right now.
yeah, what do we got for us, John?
Oh, Elliot says of note, there's a PC game where you're hired to clear adjacent land for a king, And
That's a
occasionally, as
cool
you
idea.
build buildings, other folks begin to move in and provide resources for you. Huh? Do you know what game
Mhm.
that is, Elias? I'm interested in trying that.
So he also brings up a really cool point. A rival thieves guild. Do I mean an experienced side quest? Yeah. Uh, one, if the players are trying to build their own guild, whether you've got a collection of mages and you're trying to build up a good mages guild, or maybe you're trying to branch out from a major metropolitan area and try to connect to big cities into like a little city point, or just trying to reach out an auxiliary arm or a satellite. Maybe you're trying to build a fighters guild because you have a bunch of martial fighters in your party lineup, or like in my current group, you guys have a bunch of thieves. You
Hmm.
guys are starting a thieves guild. You can make so many quests with that stuff because it feels natural
Yep.
because the players are asking for it and they're wanting to build on it, and you can start throwing at them some of the lower tier quests for your appropriate guild that you're building, and then you can work your way up into some more extravagant ones that might entail them leaving said town, and that really helps build the environment because you want your players. I've talked about this with some other GMs before. Not everybody agrees with me on this. John, maybe we'll see how you feel about this. I like having a hub, the HQ, where the players expand, they go out and they explore, and then kind of like a bungee cord, they come back to a specific place. And the reasoning behind that is that I want my players to have a sense of time, and I want them to be immersed in where they're living so that they don't just salt every farm, burn everything down as they go. They don't have this unattached feelings. Instead, they want to like enrich the environment. So when they leave and they go out, they're thinking about what items I can sell back in town. They're thinking about what blacksmith am I trying to level up so that they can, craft new gear for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that approach definitely works in some kind of games. I think other kind of games it's a little difficult. Um, like the Shifting Sand game I'm running right now definitely has that kind of hub city that it kind of acts as like the center point where you can do basically anything. Um, that kind of breaks the everything we've been talking about, where like having a settlement level and not being able to find everything there. Um, but you can still kind of have your cake and eat it too. I mean, you can have a higher level city that their hub. Once they outgrow that, um, they could find another hub that's higher level and kind of pick up and move there. So I think it's a reasonable approach to take in a lot of games. I think you're more like Lord of the Rings epic style adventures are probably not going to be able to work well with that. That are super popular now for whatever reason. I don't find those games to be the most interesting. But
Now, those formats of there and back again, thanks to Bilbo, there and back again is great for introduction to a group, especially when you have a bunch of randos. But
mm-hmm.
once you are building a game where it's your friends, they're coming to your place, or you have a good Discord where everybody is friendly and we all like show each other's faces and we all know who we are
Mm-hmm.
as like you're building a community online. That's when it's time to start building the sandbox and the open world. So
Yeah.
there and back again is a great test of metal to see like how did this player interact with all of the your NPCs that you built along the way? Did they punch them, steal them, kill them, throw them in a ditch, or were they instead giving them fair discounts? Were they building that person up, trying to get them to go on adventures with them? Um, building that friendship and the whole that spiel that I was talking about leaving and coming back. You leave the blacksmith in position X, you come back, and that blacksmith should be X plus one.
Yeah.
Time has gone by. They've gotten better at their craft, or maybe they've fallen on hard times and you need to sink some more money into them.
Yeah.
Or maybe you neglected to talk to the potion maker in town, and nobody bought any potions from them, so now they're struggling.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it goes
and
along
then
with the ever-changing, evolving cities kind of deal or settlements we talked about. And we should probably do another video on the pros and cons of sandbox versus other styles of gameplay. We'll have to add that at some point.
you're right, Alos. You cannot come back to a bird downtown. I don't.
Yeah, I mean, you
Players
can.
like
You just have to
that,
rebuild
and you're
said
playing a
town.
little campaign, have fun. If you're having a game where you want that sense of they're coming back to the town, that's their hub, that's what they're investing. And even if that kind of town does get attacked and get razed to the ground, you can use that time to shine what NPCs were your most interesting. When I was burning down a particular town, some of my characters take like John was trying to save most of. I think John, you saved
Well,
single-handedly like
I was I
50
was
from
favoring the ones that Gunner had, specific relationships with.
you had built those
Yeah.
relationships. In just that small amount of time, you were already wanting to enrich those characters' lives, those NPCs' lives. You were role playing with them. You
Mhm.
were thinking the long term effects. That's the antithesis to murder hobos,
Right.
which if you have those in your game and you're having fun with it, power to you. But we're talking about settlements, and there's always the option to raise the settlement, burn it to the ground. It's always an option. But we're talking about building them up, and sometimes as a GM, you want to build up a settlement. And I know who was it? Was it Coville who said that we're all narcissists and we like to lore build just because it's fun and it
I think
it
that was
helps
him.
with
Yeah.
yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Sometimes we want to build really, really impressive towns and take pride in it. There's
Hmm.
nothing wrong with taking pride in your NPCs knowing where things are. Not the NPCs. Your players know where things are in the town. There's nothing wrong with taking pride in your players knowing what NPC can handle what job because you've built a convincing enough world where they want to interact in. They're going to
Right.
come back to that every time.
Yeah. Something else. I mean, kind of sidestepping a bit. Something else that you know, you often consider is that um, these towns are built around resources, right? They're built on a river, or they're built, on some hills that provide nice mining opportunities. Um, there's other people out there who are going to want those resources, and they're going to look for opportunities to take those resources. So those can, that can either, lead to conflict. It can lead to um, rebellion if there's something going on inside that is not great, and then maybe someone wants to take over. It could also be maybe the town did get burnt down by players or otherwise, and somebody else further down is like, huh, everyone's gone. There's this nice river here. There's some nice stone to mine here. It's a fresh start. We could do this. I mean, there's that. It's just because the town was burnt down doesn't mean it can't come back from the grave as the same thing or something else. So,
Right. The group's going to undertake a huge undertaking of rebuilding Wireglen and Viserys.
right.
That'll be interesting. The group is currently in, John, you're missing out, a city called Twill, and this settlement is a great example of building something from the ground up. I had designed a bunch of quests that involved going to the bad town.
Mm-hmm.
It's the whole premise is that I had this idea in my mind of, when you're in town, you feel relatively safe to separate the party.
Right.
They can go off and do their own things. And the bad town, it's not safe. You rest in an inn, you might get mugged. You go off wandering across a bridge, you're probably going to get attacked. There's a lot of lawlessness in quote unquote bad town where there's no town guard. No one's going to come
Mm-hmm.
and arrest you. It's just you got to fend for yourself.
Yeah, I
And
mean, I think that's a good point. That not all towns are safe, right? Especially to outsiders.
ooh, that's a good point.
And especially to maybe there's. I mean, I hate to bring up such a touchy subject, but maybe certain towns are not super fond of certain ancestries because of past events. Maybe they had a really bad war with a group of people, and they have a
Right.
bad taste in their mouth. I mean, that kind of stuff happens. So
Absolutely.
you want to talk
Racism.
about it in session zero for sure to make sure everyone's comfortable with it. But
I think players are okay with racism between elves and dwarves or goblins and orcs or whatever. I think that the sensitive subjects you're talking about ends up being like slavery. Nobody wants to touch that.
rape, no one
If
wants to
you're
touch
going into
that.
the Underdark and you're playing with Drow, and you look at I've had some Underdark campaigns where you had some Illithids who they just I don't know if you know how their society is done. Mind players. You know how their
Yeah,
societies are run.
I mean they enslave
Flavor.
everyone basically, and they do the work.
Slave flavor.
Yeah.
And I don't see a whole lot of people up in arms about that depiction because ultimately, end of day, those Cthulhu-esque monsters are always evil.
Yeah.
And they get what's coming to them. And I think so as long as you're not really blurring that line. You're like, look, slavery is bad, and this is what happens to the Drow. The Drow have an evil god. They don't really have a choice in the matter. They're evil. It's
Right.
just like, as long as you have that like depiction of it's evil, I think it's okay. But definitely talk to your players about that kind of stuff. And in my bad town, I actually hint at some of the Fae doing that kind of stuff, but slavery exists by Fae is kind of your own fault if you're enslaved by a Fae. You need a deal. Should you make deal with the Fae creatures?
In my experience, it's not a good idea.
What? Didn't you get a great wait? Didn't you get great weapons for making a deal with the?
Yeah, I do, but it always comes at a cost.
A mill. You got a fortress, and what was the third thing you got from making that deal with Lord Bastardam?
Briarheart. That was something different.
Something you got three things out of it. I'm trying to remember. You got a mill, a fortress. You were given a station as.
Well, I was given the opportunity to go home. My character was given the opportunity to, once I was
Right.
finished, to go home.
No wonder Gunnar is just so lackluster. Does Gunnar need to go home?
Well, it's kind of not. He realizes now it's not really an option because everyone's dead anyway.
And for that Faye, hey, sometimes uh, banks is a huge thing that you need to add to your cities. I love having banks. Um, like who makes the minting and the coins,
Mhm.
especially for big cities. That was something that I thought about. I just like tip of my tongue when I think of it. But for like dealing with Fey creatures, having brokers is always an option. If you are close to the Fey Wilds and you want to add that into your settlements, that's something to consider. The Fey like to take from rural areas. Um, so like if you were introducing a settlement to your players and you say like there's like a saucer of milk and like a slice of bread out on their step, and then like they come back later and they see that it's been drank and it's been gone.
Mhm.
You can give those like little tiny signs that like the Fae are,
Wow.
right, and the people worship them. So that's another thing. Iconography is something that you want to cover.
Iconography, you
Having
said?
right.
Yeah.
So chevrons. If there are banners on your town's guard or banners on the walls, those are things that you want to describe when doing a settlement, like what the sigil looks like for the monarch or the guilds. Those kind of insignias are great
If you're going to
for.
be mapping your settlements, then yeah, that's definitely something you really want to be.
I'm more talking about the RP perspective. Like you would say, like your group gets to a tavern, and on top of the tavern, there's this sigil, and then like the players be like, okay, oh, I need to make an Arcana check. And you'd be like, you've accurately identified that as the Mages Guild sigil. So now this particular area is either patrolled or controlled by the Mages
Right.
Guild, or
Yeah.
maybe they recognize a little cloak and dagger looking sigil, whatever the edge lord sigils are for thieves guilds.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when you're designing your organizations and factions and all that, it's definitely a good idea to give them, you know, some aesthetic influence as well. Like, what are their iconography? What kind of attire do they wear? Maybe they have a uniform or something, right? Maybe they have specific tattoos that are often hidden, but there's something to like, you know,
Ooh,
people can recognize them
discernible mark,
by.
everyone.
Um,
Uh, Signets are really good to have on your lords. In one of my towns, I had a lord want to have a summer home built in that town, and they kind of like moved a lot of their holdings over to the new town because it was more
mhm.
profitable. And so one of the things that I ended up doing was like signet rings for this lord. What his chevrons, what his colors, his banners were, and like they brought their own architecture to that city. So that's another thing. Some tropes I really fall into for some reason. Kobolds, they always end up being Russian, and they always have a very like Russian style architecture that I love to like throw in like beautiful spires. Um, you know, the elves usually have like a kind of like a I think it's called cottage gore. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but
Mm.
it's you know the early English Irish architecture, that
Okay.
kind of stuff. So if you're doing like a genie, I know it's really trope, but it's those things are called shorthand. It's when you describe like city that looks like Agrabah, the players can kind of like wrap their mind around
It's
what the
yeah, it's
grass
familiar
city
to
is.
them, right? It's
It's called shorthand for a reason because you're describing something and it gives the players a comfortable setting to be in it. So don't be afraid if your ideas are trope like. It can actually be very grounding and centering for
hmm
when you're designing a settlement.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and I take advantage of that a lot as well. Um, and I think most settings do to some degree, at least. Because if something's too foreign, it's really hard for players to wrap their head around. So there needs to be something there that grounds them into reality, um, and makes them be able to recognize what's going on. But it is 5:02 my time, so a
Gonna
little over
wrap
an
this up.
hour at this
Uh,
point. So we could probably start doing closing thoughts here. Um,
so don't forget to like us, follow us. We have the Reddit, we have the Discord. Those are available on our website. We're on Mastodon, Twitter. Uh, John, you have Insta,
yeah,
and
this will be posted on YouTube as usual. It's also posted on Odyssey, which is a more libre uh, video viewing or content viewing platform. If that's your thing,
would you
both
say
links will be
Odyssey is
posted.
would you say Odyssey is more less censorship?
Yes, very much less censorship. It's not as like algorithm focused, so views is what gives us the best result there. So definitely check us out there if that's your thing. Um, we are trying to do more game mastery and inspired videos for Pathfinder versus just straight up like looking at feats and ancestries and whatnot. So let us know what you guys thought of this kind of stuff. This stuff is not often specific to Pathfinder all the time. Like a lot of the stuff in this one could be used in basically any tabletop RPG. So yeah, let us know what you guys thought about that. But until next time, happy gaming.